She knew the sound of expensive shoes on marble floors. Marlo Elizabeth Chen paused mid-sweep in the hotel's main lobby, her grip tightening around the broom handle as familiar footsteps echoed through the afternoon silence. 3 years working at the Carmel Bay Boutique Hotel had taught her to read guests by their walk, the hurried click of business heels, the leisurely shuffle of vacation sandals, the confident stride of old money. But these footsteps, these she remembered. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she slowly turned toward the entrance. The California sun streamed through the glass doors, creating a silhouette she'd tried so hard to forget. Tall, imposing, moving with that same precise confidence that had captivated her 3 years ago during one unforgettable night. Thaddeus. Even without seeing his face clearly, she knew. The set of his shoulders, the way he carried himself like he owned every room he entered. It was him, the man who'd disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only rumpled sheets and the faintest scent of expensive cologne. The man who didn't know he had a son. Ma'am. Excuse me, ma'am. His voice cut through her paralysis, deep, authoritative, with that slight rasp she'd never forgotten. I have a reservation. Donovan. Marlo's hand instinctively went to her collar, adjusting it twice before she realized what she was doing. Her tell, the gesture she made whenever she was about to lie, or hide something, or pretend her world wasn't about to collapse. Just breathe. He doesn't recognize you. 3 years. Different hair. The uniform. She approached the front desk where Helen, the day manager, was already pulling up the reservation system. Marlo tried to blend into the background, but her eyes betrayed her, drinking in details she'd memorized long ago. The sharp line of his jaw, those blue-gray eyes that seemed to see everything, the way his expensive suit fit perfectly across his broad shoulders. He looked older now, more lines around his eyes, a weariness that hadn't been there before. Success had a price, and it showed in the way he held himself, like Atlas carrying the world. Mr. Donovan, welcome back, Helen chirped. It's been quite a while. Same room preferences. The suite overlooking the garden, he replied, his gaze already drifting toward the windows. I need quiet. Marlo's breath caught. The garden, where Oliver played every afternoon after his nap, pushing his little yellow truck through the sand, babbling to himself in that sweet toddler language that made her heart melt. God, what if he sees him? What if— Of course, sir. You'll have the Monterey suite. Top floor, complete privacy. Helen's fingers flew across the keyboard. Will you be needing any special accommodations? Thad, as he'd whispered to her that night, shook his head. Just peace. I have some thinking to do. As Helen processed his check-in, Marlo found herself studying his hands. The same long fingers that had traced her face in the moonlight. The same hands that had held her like she was something precious. No wedding ring. That surprised her, though she couldn't say why. Marlo, Helen's voice snapped her back to reality. Could you show Mr. Donovan to his suite? I need to handle this call. No. Of course, Marlo heard herself saying, her voice surprisingly steady. She set down the broom and smoothed her uniform, the same gray dress that every housekeeper wore, the one that made her invisible to most guests. But as she moved toward the elevator, keycard in hand, she felt his eyes on her, really looking at her for the first time. Have we— he started, then stopped, his brow furrowing. You seem familiar. Marlo's heart nearly stopped. She adjusted her collar again, then forced her hand back to her side. I don't think so, sir. I have one of those faces. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and she stepped inside, acutely aware of his presence behind her. The space felt impossibly small, filled with the same subtle cologne that still haunted her dreams. 3rd floor, she said, pressing the button with a trembling finger. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken recognition. Marlo stared at the brass doors, watching the floor numbers climb, while every instinct screamed at her to run. Just get him to his room. Just get through this. He'll be gone in a few days, just like before. But as the elevator climbed toward the 3rd floor, carrying them both toward an inevitable reckoning, Marlo couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. The doors opened with a soft chime, and she stepped out, her legs somehow still carrying her forward. What would happen when he discovered the truth about Oliver? Some secrets have a way of finding the light. Thad stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Monterey suite, his reflection ghost-like in the glass as afternoon shadows stretched across the hotel's garden below. The Pacific Ocean glittered in the distance, but his attention was fixed on something much closer, a small figure with sandy brown hair pushing a yellow toy truck through the carefully manicured flower beds. The child couldn't be more than 2, maybe 3. He moved with the determined focus that only toddlers possessed, completely absorbed in his imaginary world. There was something about the way he held his head, the stubborn set of his tiny shoulders. Stop. You're seeing things that aren't there. But Thad couldn't look away. The boy paused in his play, tilting his face toward the sun, and even from 3 floors up, something familiar tugged at Thad's chest, a recognition he couldn't name. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Housekeeping. Her voice. The woman from the elevator. Marlo. Helen had called her. The one who claimed they'd never met. Despite the electricity that had crackled between them in that small space. Despite the way her hands had trembled when she'd handed him the key card. Come in, he called, not moving from the window. He heard the door open, the quiet whisper of her footsteps on thick carpet. In the window's reflection, he watched her move efficiently through the suite, checking towels, adjusting pillows, her movements practiced and graceful. Beautiful view, she said softly, and he turned to find her standing a few feet behind him, her arms full of fresh linens. It is. He gestured toward the garden. That child down there, does he belong to one of the staff? Marlowe's reflection in the glass went perfectly still. For a heartbeat, neither of them breathed. Oliver, she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. He belongs to someone who works here, yes. Oliver. Thad tested the name, surprised by how easily it rolled off his tongue. Unusual name for such a young boy. His mother thought he looked wise, even as a baby. There was something in her voice now, protective, fierce. Children that young, they see the world differently, pure, you know? Thad turned fully to face her, studying her profile as she continued to watch the garden. The afternoon light caught the gold in her brown hair, and something stirred in his memory. Another afternoon, another shaft of sunlight, another woman who'd looked at him like he was worth something. Do I know you? The question escaped before he could stop it. Marlowe's hands went to her collar, that same nervous gesture from earlier. I clean a lot of rooms, Mr. Donovan. Most guests don't remember the help. The words stung more than they should have. And I'm not most guests. No, she agreed quietly, finally meeting his eyes. You're not. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Outside, Oliver's laughter drifted up through the open window, pure joy distilled into sound. How old is he? Thad asked, the question slipping out before his rational mind could intervene. Marlowe's face went carefully blank. 2.5 years. The timeline hit him like a physical blow. He turned back to the window, his hands gripping the frame as his mind raced through calculations he didn't want to make. Mr. Donovan? Are you all right? Her voice seemed to come from very far away. 2.5 years ago, he'd been here, in this same hotel, in this same suite. Running from a deal gone wrong, from the weight of expectations he could never meet, from the growing certainty that his life was becoming a prison of his own making. And there had been a woman, a moment of connection so pure, so unexpected that it had terrified him. Someone who'd looked at him and seen not the ruthless businessman or the heir to a real estate empire, but just a man, a lonely man who'd forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen. He'd left the next morning without saying goodbye, without even learning her name. I should go, Marlo said suddenly, her voice tight. Your room is ready and I have other… Stay. The word came out rougher than he'd intended. Please. She froze in the doorway, her back to him. I can't. I have work to do. Marlo. Her name felt familiar on his tongue, like muscle memory. 3 years ago. I should check on Oliver. She was already moving, practically fleeing toward the door. He gets restless when his nap runs too long. She was gone before he could say another word, leaving only the faint scent of lavender soap and the echo of her footsteps in the hallway. Thad turned back to the window, his heart hammering against his ribs. The garden below was empty now. No little boy with sandy hair and familiar gray eyes. But the yellow truck remained, abandoned in a patch of afternoon sunlight. What if the impossible was actually the inevitable? The truth has a way of hiding in plain sight. Marlowe's hands shook as she unlocked the small staff apartment behind the hotel's main building. Her heart hadn't stopped racing since she'd fled Thaddeus's suite, and now, facing the familiar chaos of toys scattered across her living room floor, reality crashed over her like a cold wave. "Mama!" Oliver toddled toward her from where Mrs. Henley, the elderly neighbor who watched him during work hours, sat reading a picture book. His chubby arms reached up, and Marlowe swept him into her embrace, breathing in that sweet baby scent that always centered her world. "Hey, little man," she whispered against his soft hair. "Did you have a good afternoon?" "Truck," Oliver announced proudly, patting her cheek with sticky fingers. "Outside truck, the yellow truck, left in the garden where Thad could see it from his window. He's been asking for you all afternoon," Mrs. Henley said, gathering her things. Bright as a penny, that one. Those eyes of his, so unusual, like storm clouds, my grandmother would have said. Marlowe's chest tightened. Everyone who met Oliver commented on his eyes, those distinctive blue-gray orbs that seemed far too knowing for such a young face. The same eyes that had stared down at her from the third-floor window just minutes ago. After Mrs. Henley left, Marlowe set Oliver down and watched him immediately return to his toys. A fleet of miniature cars and trucks covered the worn carpet. His favorites were always the construction vehicles, the ones that built things rather than just transported them. Like his father, the thought came unbidden, and she pushed it away. Oliver was hers. She'd carried him, birthed him, raised him through sleepless nights and teething tears. She'd sung him to sleep with the same lullaby her mother had sung to her, had kissed scraped knees and celebrated first steps. She'd been enough. They'd been enough. Her phone buzzed. A text from Helen. "Mr. Donovan asked specifically for you to service his room tomorrow morning. Usual rate plus tip. Lucky you." Marlowe stared at the message until the words blurred. He knew. Maybe not consciously, not yet, but some part of him remembered that night 3 years ago, the way they'd talked for hours on his balcony, sharing stories and silences with equal intimacy, the way he'd looked at her like she was the most fascinating woman in the world, not just a housekeeper taking a break from her shift, the way he'd made love to her like it meant something. "Mama sad?" Oliver appeared beside her, his small hand patting her leg with the same gentle gesture he used when she had headaches. "No, baby. Mama's just thinking." But Oliver wasn't fooled. At 2.5, he already read emotions with startling accuracy. He climbed into her lap, his sturdy little body warm and reassuring, and pressed his forehead against hers. Their special gesture. "Tell story," he demanded in his sweet, lisping voice. "Which story, baby?" "Daddy's story." Marlowe's breath caught. They'd never talked about his father. Oliver was too young to understand why other children had daddies and he didn't. But lately, he'd become fascinated with the concept, asking questions that broke her heart and filled her with guilt in equal measure. "Once upon a time," she began, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest, "there was a little boy who was so loved by his mama that he didn't need anything else in the whole wide world." "But where, Daddy?" Oliver persisted, his small fingers tracing patterns on her arm. Before she could answer, a knock echoed through the small apartment. Marlowe froze, Oliver still in her arms. Nobody visited them. Mrs. Henley always called first, and the hotel staff knew she was off duty. It couldn't be. He wouldn't have. The knock came again, more insistent this time. "Mama, door," Oliver observed helpfully. Marlowe's mind raced. The apartment was clearly lived in by a single mother. Oliver's toys everywhere, pictures of just the two of them on the walls. No trace of a man's presence anywhere. If Thaddeus was at her door, if he saw this, she had no choice. Setting Oliver down with his trucks, she smoothed her hair and opened the door just wide enough to slip outside, closing it quickly behind her. Thaddeus stood on her small porch, looking completely out of place in his expensive suit among the modest staff housing. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, those same blue-gray eyes that stared back at her from Oliver's face every day, were intense with barely contained emotion. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "I don't know what about the boy in the garden." "Oliver," his voice was careful, controlled, but she could hear the tremor underneath. "He's mine, isn't he?" The question hung in the evening air between them like a bridge she couldn't cross and couldn't burn. Inside the apartment, Oliver's voice rose in happy babble as he played with his trucks, completely unaware that his entire world was about to change. Some secrets, once spoken, could never be taken back. Some lies crumble the moment they're challenged. Marlowe's hand went to her collar, then dropped to her side as she caught herself. There was no point in the gesture now, no uniform to adjust, no lie to hide behind, just her, standing on her own doorstep, facing the father of her child. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Thad stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Please don't make this harder than it already is." Behind the closed door, Oliver's laughter bubbled up, pure and innocent, and completely oblivious to the storm brewing on the other side of the thin wood. 3 years ago, Thad continued, his eyes never leaving her face. "You were working the night shift. You brought me coffee around midnight because I couldn't sleep, and we talked until sunrise about everything and nothing. You told me about your grandmother's lullabies, about wanting to study accounting, about how you believed people were basically good even when they gave you reasons not to." Marlowe's chest tightened with each detail. He remembered. God help them both. He remembered everything. "You wore your hair down that night," he said softly. "You laughed when I said I'd never met anyone who could make instant coffee taste like hope." "Stop." The word escaped as barely a breath. "You have a small scar on your left shoulder from when you fell off your bike at 7. You sing when you're nervous, old songs your mother taught you, and when you sleep, you curl up on your right side with your hand under your cheek." Tears burned behind her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I never forgot. Not you, not that night, not the way you made me feel like I was worth something beyond my bank account." His voice cracked slightly. "And because there's a little boy in there who has my eyes and my stubborn chin, and probably my terrible habit of overthinking everything." Inside, Oliver's voice rose in excited chatter, followed by the sound of toy trucks being crashed together with gleeful abandon. "He's 2.5, Thad said. "Born 9 months after I left." Marlowe wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm California evening. "You left without a word, without even telling me your real name. I know. You made me feel like I was someone special, and then you vanished like I was nothing. I know." His voice was rough with regret. "I was a coward. I was scared of what you made me feel. Scared of ruining something perfect with my family's history of destroying everything good. So you destroyed it anyway." The words hung between them like an accusation. Thad's face crumpled slightly, and for a moment, he looked less like the imposing businessman and more like the lost, lonely man she'd held that night 3 years ago. "I came back," he said quietly. 6 months later, "I came back looking for you, but you weren't working here anymore. Helen said you'd taken a leave of absence for personal reasons. Maternity leave." The words lodged in her throat. "I left my contact information. Asked them to call if you ever came back. They never told me. I waited. I hoped." He dragged a hand through his dark hair, messing up the perfect styling. "Eventually, I stopped hoping. But I never stopped coming back here, to this place where I felt alive for the first time in years." A crash from inside the apartment was followed by Oliver's distressed wail. Marlowe's maternal instincts kicked in immediately. "I have to. Let me meet him." The simple request hit her like a physical blow. "No. Marlowe. No." Her voice was fierce now, protective. "You don't get to walk back into my life and make demands. You don't get to meet my son because it suits you now. My son, too." The quiet words stopped her cold. "Isn't he?" Thad's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Please, I'm not asking to take him away from you. I'm not asking to upend his life. I need to know him. I need him to know that his father isn't someone who abandoned him by choice." Oliver's crying intensified, and Marlowe could hear him calling for her through the door. "He needs me," she said, her hand on the doorknob. "I can see that. You're an amazing mother. Anyone can see how much you love him." The compliment caught her off guard, making her chest tight with emotion. "One conversation," Thad said softly. "Let me talk to him for 5 minutes. If it goes badly, if you're uncomfortable, I'll leave. I'll go back to New York and you'll never see me again." Marlowe's hand stilled on the doorknob. Behind the door, Oliver had stopped crying, but she could hear him sniffling, probably wiping his nose on his sleeve like he always did. "And if it goes well?" she asked. Thad's answer was barely audible above the evening breeze. "Then maybe we figure out what comes next. Some moments change everything, even when nothing happens at all." Marlowe turned the doorknob with trembling fingers, her decision made not by logic, but by the sound of her son's sniffles and the raw vulnerability in Thaddeus's voice. Some risks, she realized, were worth taking, not for herself, but for Oliver. 5 minutes, she whispered, opening the door just wide enough for them both to slip inside. The small apartment felt even smaller with Thad's imposing presence filling the space. He stood frozen just inside the doorway, his expensive suit completely out of place among the cheerful chaos of children's toys and mismatched furniture. His eyes swept the room, taking in every detail: the photos of Oliver's first steps taped to the refrigerator, the stack of accounting textbooks on the kitchen counter, the tiny sneakers lined up by the door. Oliver sat in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the wreckage of his truck convoy, tears still wet on his cheeks. He looked up as they entered, his gray eyes, so much like his father's, curious but wary. "Mama," he said, his voice still wobbly from crying. Truck broke. Marlo knelt beside him, her movements automatic as she checked him for injuries. "Just a wheel came off, baby. We can fix it." But Oliver wasn't looking at her anymore. His gaze had shifted to the tall stranger standing motionless by the door, and Marlo watched with a mixture of terror and fascination as father and son studied each other for the first time. "Big man," Oliver observed with typical toddler directness. Thad's breath caught audibly. For a moment he seemed unable to speak, his hands clenched at his sides as if he was fighting the urge to reach out. "Yes," he managed finally, his voice rougher than usual. I'm pretty tall." Oliver tilted his head, considering this response with the serious concentration that made him seem older than his years. "You know, Mama?" The simple question hung in the air, loaded with implications that Oliver couldn't possibly understand. Marlo found herself holding her breath, waiting to see how Thad would answer. "I do know your mama," Thad said carefully, taking a single step closer. "We're old friends." "Oh," Oliver seemed to accept this explanation easily. "I'm Oliver. I know. I'm Thad." "Tad?" Oliver's face scrunched up as he tried to pronounce the unfamiliar name. "That's right. Can you say it?" "Tad," Oliver repeated more confidently, then grinned, that same crooked smile that had made Marlo fall in love with his father 3 years ago. "Funny name." Despite everything, Thad laughed, a real laugh that transformed his entire face. "It is pretty funny, isn't it?" Oliver nodded seriously, then held up his broken truck. "Fix." The request was simple, but Marlo saw the way it hit Thad like a physical blow. To be needed, even for something so small, by this perfect little person who shared his DNA. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. "May I?" Thad looked at Marlo for permission. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Thad moved slowly, as if approaching a skittish animal, and lowered himself to sit cross-legged on the floor. Oliver immediately scooted closer, truck in hand, with the fearless trust that only children possessed. "Let's see what's wrong," Thad said, accepting the toy with reverence usually reserved for priceless artifacts. His large hands looked impossibly gentle as he examined the small vehicle. "Ah, I see. The axle came loose. We just need to push it back in place." He demonstrated the simple repair, then handed the truck back. Oliver tested it immediately, rolling it across the carpet with a satisfied, "Vroom." "You good at fixing?" Oliver announced approvingly. "I build things for work," Thad explained. "Big buildings, not trucks. But trucks are better. They're more fun." "You build houses?" "Sometimes. Mostly big buildings where people work." Oliver considered this with the gravity of a tiny philosopher. "I build too." He gestured to his scattered toys. "Wanna see?" And just like that, Marlo watched her carefully ordered world shift on its axis. For the next few minutes, she observed as her son, her precious, perfect son, showed his father every truck, every car, every building block in his collection. Oliver chattered constantly, explaining the complex rules of his imaginary construction sites with the passionate intensity that only toddlers could muster. Thad listened to every word as if Oliver were delivering a lecture on quantum physics. He asked questions, made appropriately impressed sounds, and even helped build a tower of blocks that Oliver promptly knocked down with delighted giggles. "Again," Oliver demanded, clapping his hands. "Again," Thad agreed, already reaching for more blocks. Marlo pressed her back against the kitchen counter, watching this impossible scene unfold in her living room. The man who'd broken her heart was sitting on her floor, building block towers with their Sunday, and Oliver was looking at him with the kind of easy affection that usually took weeks to develop. Maybe it was genetics, maybe it was magic, maybe it was just the simple fact that children recognized kindness instinctively. "Mama, look," Oliver called, pointing to their latest architectural achievement. Tad helped. "I see, baby. It's beautiful." But Oliver had already moved on to the next project, tugging at Thad's sleeve. "Read story." Thad looked helplessly at Marlo. I've never, the blue book," she found herself saying. It's his favorite." 5 minutes had become 10, then 15, and Marlo couldn't bring herself to call time. Watching Thad attempt to read "Goodnight Moon," while Oliver corrected his pronunciation and added his own commentary, was simultaneously heartbreaking and healing. When Oliver finally yawned, snuggling unconsciously against Thad's arm, Marlo felt her world tilt irreversibly off its axis. What had she just set in motion? Sometimes the hardest conversations happen in whispers. Oliver had fallen asleep against Thad's shoulder 20 minutes ago, his small body completely relaxed, one chubby hand still clutching his yellow truck. Thad hadn't moved since, afraid that any motion might break the spell of this perfect, impossible moment. Marlo sat curled in the armchair across from them, studying the tableau they made. Her son's sandy hair against his father's navy suit jacket, the way Thad's large hand rested protectively on Oliver's back, the expression of wonder and terror warring on his face. "He's beautiful," Thad whispered, his voice barely audible above Oliver's soft breathing. "He is." Marlo's voice was equally quiet. "He's everything good in my world. I can see why." Thad's eyes never left Oliver's sleeping face. "He has your spirit. The way he just accepted me. No fear, no hesitation. He's always been like that. Open, trusting." She paused, then added with a slight edge, "Maybe too trusting." The barb hit its mark. Thad's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I should put him to bed," Marlo said, starting to rise. Could I carry him?" "Just to his room." The request was so careful, so hopeful, that Marlo felt her resolve wavering again. She nodded toward the small hallway. Second door. Thad stood with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to boardrooms and business deals, but his movements were different now, careful, protective, as if he held something infinitely precious. Oliver stirred slightly but didn't wake, instinctively snuggling closer to the warmth and strength he found there. Marlo followed them into Oliver's small bedroom, watching as Thad took in every detail. The hand-painted stars on the ceiling, the bookshelf crammed with picture books, the rocking chair where she sang lullabies every night. "Where should I?" Thad gestured toward the toddler bed with its cheerful dinosaur sheets. "Just lay him down gently. He's a heavy sleeper." Thad lowered Oliver onto the mattress with the concentration of a surgeon, his hands lingering a moment longer than necessary as he smoothed the blanket over his son's shoulders. Oliver mumbled something unintelligible and rolled onto his side, one arm hanging off the edge of the bed. "Does he always sleep like that?" Thad asked, a smile tugging at his lips. "Like a starfish. I have no idea where he gets it from." "I do." Thad's admission was quiet. "I've been told I take up an entire king-size bed all by myself." The intimacy of the confession, the casual reference to how he slept, made Marlo's chest tight with memories she'd tried so hard to bury. That night 3 years ago, she'd woken to find him sprawled across the hotel bed like he was claiming territory, one arm thrown across her waist, his face peaceful in sleep. She'd lain there for an hour, memorizing the way he looked when he wasn't wearing his armor of expensive suits and careful control. "We should talk," she said, stepping back into the hallway. They settled at her small kitchen table, the space between them feeling vast despite the cramped quarters. Thad looked impossibly out of place among her thrift store furniture and Oliver's art projects taped to the refrigerator, but he seemed more relaxed than she'd seen him since his arrival. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked finally. Marlo had been dreading this question, but now that it came, she found herself oddly calm. "Tell you what, I didn't even know your real name until today. You could have found me. You knew which company I worked for. I told you about the Manhattan project that was keeping me up at night." "Right, because approaching the CEO of Donovan Enterprises to inform him that the housekeeping staff member he slept with is pregnant would have gone so well." Thad flinched. "Is that really what you think of me? That I would have dismissed you? I think you're a man who's used to controlling every variable in his life. An unplanned pregnancy with someone from a completely different world? That's not exactly controllable." "You're right." His admission surprised her. 3 years ago, that's exactly what I would have done. I would have written a check and convinced myself I was being generous. And now I've spent an hour watching my son build block towers, and I can't imagine any amount of money being worth missing that. His voice was raw with emotion. I've missed everything, haven't I? His first steps, his first words. His first word was, Mama, Marlo said softly. But his second was, truck. He's been obsessed with them since he could sit up. I noticed. Thad smiled despite the pain in his eyes. What else? Tell me everything. So she did. Sitting at her tiny kitchen table, sharing lukewarm coffee from mismatched mugs, Marlo found herself telling this virtual stranger about their son's quirks and milestones. How Oliver insisted on wearing his pajamas backward because he liked the buttons in front. How he'd cried for a week when a bird died in their garden because he couldn't understand why it wouldn't wake up. How he sang made-up songs in the bathtub and insisted on brushing his teeth to the rhythm of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Thad absorbed every detail like a man dying of thirst, asking questions, laughing at Oliver's antics, his expression growing more tender with each story. He sounds perfect, he said finally. He's not. He throws epic tantrums when he's tired. He refuses to eat anything green. And he once painted the bathroom wall with diaper cream while I was taking a shower. That sounds pretty perfect to me. The warmth in his voice made her stomach flutter dangerously. This was the man she'd fallen for 3 years ago. Not the polished businessman, but the one who found magic in everyday moments. What happens now? She asked. The question she'd been avoiding all evening. Thad was quiet for a long moment, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug like an anchor. I don't know, he admitted. I don't have a roadmap for this, but I know I can't walk away. Not from him. Not again. And what about me? The question burned on her tongue, but she couldn't bring herself to ask it. Outside, the Pacific wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the late-night sounds of the hotel settling for the evening. Everything was about to change, and she wasn't sure any of them were ready. Some storms arrived disguised as ordinary mornings. Marlo's alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m., just as it had every morning for the past 3 years. But today felt different, charged with the electricity of change, heavy with possibilities she wasn't ready to name. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying every moment of the previous evening, every expression that had crossed Thad's face as he'd held their son. Oliver was still asleep, sprawled across his dinosaur sheets exactly as his father had left him. The sight made her chest tight with emotion she couldn't untangle. At the hotel, the morning routine felt surreal. She moved through her tasks mechanically, checking linens, restocking supplies, preparing for the breakfast shift, while her thoughts remained fixed on the impossible reality that Thaddeus Donovan was somewhere in this building, probably lying awake in the Monterey suite, thinking about their son. You look like hell, observed Carmen Vasquez, the head housekeeper, as they crossed paths in the supply closet. Carmen had worked at the hotel for 15 years and had taken Marlo under her wing when she'd returned from maternity leave. Nothing escaped her notice. Thanks for the pep talk, Marlo muttered, grabbing fresh towels. Seriously, what's wrong? You've been jumpy all morning. Before Marlo could answer, Helen's voice crackled over the radio. Marlo to the front desk, please. Marlo to the front desk. Carmen raised an eyebrow. That's never good news. At the front desk, Helen wore the brittle smile she reserved for difficult situations. Beside her stood a man Marlo didn't recognize. Tall, thin, with the predatory look of someone who made his living from other people's problems. Marlo. This is Mr. Davidson from Pacific Coast Development. He'd like to speak with you about your living arrangements. Davidson's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Ms. Chen, isn't it? I understand you reside in one of the staff apartments behind the main building. That's right. Marlo's voice was carefully neutral, but alarm bells were ringing in her head. I'm afraid there's been a change in policy. The new ownership is looking to maximize the property's potential, and the staff housing is no longer financially viable. New ownership. The words felt like ice water in her veins. Pacific Coast Development has acquired the Carmel Bay Boutique Hotel. We'll be renovating extensively over the next few months, which means the staff quarters will need to be vacated by the end of next week. The world tilted sideways. Next week, but I have a lease, which was with the previous owners. We're prepared to offer you a generous relocation allowance, of course. Davidson's tone suggested the allowance would be anything but generous. Helen looked stricken. Mr. Davidson, surely we can work something out. Marlo is one of our best employees, and she has a young child. Business is business, Ms. Torres. We're not running a charity. Marlo's hands were shaking now, but she kept her voice steady. How much time do I have to find alternative housing? 7 days from today. The paperwork will be delivered this afternoon. 7 days. In Carmel, where even studio apartments rented for more than she made in a month, with Oliver to consider, and her accounting classes, and the carefully balanced life she'd built from nothing. If that's all, Davidson continued, I have other matters to attend to. He strode out of the lobby like a man who'd just crossed an unpleasant task off his list, leaving Marlo and Helen staring after him in stunned silence. This is insane, Helen whispered. They can't just... They can. Marlo's voice was hollow. They own the building now. We're just inconveniences to be cleared away. The radio crackled again. Housekeeping needed in the Monterey suite. Marlo's heart lurched. Of all the times for this summons, it had to be now, when her world was crashing down around her, when she felt more vulnerable than she had since the day she'd learned she was pregnant. I'll handle it. Carmen's voice came from behind them. She must have heard everything. No. Marlo straightened her shoulders. It's my assignment. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt like ascending to her execution. Her hands trembled as she knocked on the suite door, and when Thad opened it, hair still damp from his shower, wearing jeans and a simple white shirt instead of his usual armor of expensive suits, she nearly lost her composure entirely. Marlo, his smile was warm, genuine, transforming his entire face. I was hoping to see you this morning. I wanted to thank you for last night, meeting Oliver. It means everything to me. She nodded numbly, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. His expression shifted as he took in her pale face, the way her hands shook as she clutched her cleaning supplies. What's wrong? Nothing. I'm here to service your room. Marlo. He stepped closer, his voice gentle. Talk to me. And suddenly, the careful control she'd maintained for 3 years cracked wide open. The words tumbled out. Davidson's visit, the eviction notice, the impossible timeline, the way her carefully constructed life was about to implode. Thad listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each detail. Pacific Coast Development, he repeated when she finished. You're sure that was the name? Yes. Why? His expression was grim. Because I know them. They're corporate raiders who buy properties at below market value, usually through intimidation and dirty tactics. They probably offered the previous owners a fraction of what this place is worth. What does that matter now? I still have to find somewhere to live in 7 days. No, Thad said quietly, his voice carrying a tone she'd never heard before. Dangerous. Determined. You don't. Before she could ask what he meant, his phone was in his hand, his fingers flying over the screen. Marcus. It's Thad. I need you to run a complete financial analysis on Pacific Coast Development. Yes, immediately. And Marcus, cancel my meetings for the rest of the week. He ended the call and looked at her with an intensity that made her step back. And they picked the wrong fight. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who know your weaknesses. The war room that Thad improvised in his suite would have impressed any Fortune 500 executive. Laptop open, phone constantly buzzing, papers scattered across the coffee table like battle plans. Marlo sat curled in the corner of the sofa, watching him work with the focused intensity of a predator sizing up prey. Marcus found something, Thad said, hanging up his latest call. Pacific Coast Development isn't just buying properties. They're systematically targeting small, family-owned businesses up and down the coast. Hotels, restaurants, local shops. They lowball the owners. And when that doesn't work, they use pressure tactics. What kind of pressure tactics? Thad's expression darkened. The kind that would make your eviction notice look generous. Health code violations that mysteriously appear overnight. Zoning challenges, sudden tax assessments. Anything to force a sale. Marlo felt sick. So this isn't personal. We're just collateral damage. Actually, it might be more personal than you think. Thad pulled up something on his laptop screen. Look at this. The screen showed a corporate filing, dense with legal language that meant nothing to Marlo. But Thad's finger pointed to a name that made her blood run cold. Marcus Blackwood, he read. CEO and primary investor in Pacific Coast Development. The name hit her like a physical blow. Blackwood, as in my former business partner, as in the man whose fiancé left him for me 2 years ago, even though I never pursued her, as in someone who has very good reasons to want to hurt me in the most personal way possible. Marlo stared at the screen, pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. He knows about Oliver. I don't see how he could. The hotel keeps records of long-term guests. Staff assignments. If someone wanted to dig into your stays here 3 years ago, figure out who you might have been in contact with. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. He's not after the hotel. He's after us. Thad's phone rang, cutting through the tension. He glanced at the screen and his face went pale. It's him. Don't answer it. But Thad was already swiping to accept the call, his expression shifting into the cold mask she recognized from their first encounter. Marcus. His voice was arctic. This is unexpected. Even from across the room, Marlo could hear the smooth, cultured voice on the other end. Thaddeus, I trust you're enjoying your stay in Carmel. Such a charming little hotel, though I understand it's about to undergo some changes. Get to the point. Always so direct. Very well. I believe you've met Ms. Chen by now. Lovely woman. And her son. Adorable child. Such unusual eyes. Marlo's hands clenched into fists. The casual way he spoke about Oliver, like he was discussing the weather, made her want to scream. What do you want, Marcus? A conversation? Man to man. There's a lovely little cafe on Ocean Avenue. Windswept gardens. Meet me there in an hour, and perhaps we can discuss terms that would be mutually beneficial. And if I refuse, then Miss Chen and her son will find themselves homeless by week's end, and I'm afraid the job market in Carmel is about to become quite competitive. Amazing how word travels about difficult employees. The line went dead. Thad stared at his phone for a long moment, then looked at Marlo with an expression that was part rage, part determination, and part something else she couldn't identify. I'm going to meet him. No. Marlo was on her feet instantly. It's a trap. You know it's a trap. Of course it's a trap. But he has us backed into a corner, and the only way out is through. Us? The word escaped before she could stop it. Thad's eyes softened slightly. Yes, us. You and Oliver. You're not alone in this anymore. The simple declaration did something dangerous to her carefully guarded heart. For 3 years, she'd fought every battle by herself, made every decision with only Oliver's welfare in mind. The idea of having someone in her corner, someone willing to stand between her and the world's sharp edges. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. He threatened my son, Thad. My son. If you think I'm going to sit here while you two play whatever game this is, it's not a game. His voice was sharp with worry. Marcus is dangerous. He's charming and smart and completely ruthless. He'll use you against me without a second thought. Then don't give him the chance. Marlo moved closer, placing her hand on his arm. Either we do this together, or we don't do it at all. For a moment, they stood frozen in that tableau, her hand on his sleeve, their faces inches apart, the weight of everything unspoken hanging between them like a bridge neither quite dared to cross. Marlo. His voice was rough with emotion. I know, she whispered. I know this is complicated. I know we have history and baggage and 1,000 reasons why this is impossible. But right now, none of that matters. The only thing that matters is protecting Oliver. And you. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Protecting you matters too. The admission hung in the air between them, fragile and fierce and terrifying in its honesty. Outside, the California sun was beginning its descent toward the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Somewhere in the staff quarters, Oliver was probably waking up from his nap, asking Mrs. Henley when Mama would be home. 1 hour, Marlo said finally. We'll face him together. Thad nodded, but his expression remained troubled, because they both knew that some battles, once begun, changed everything, win or lose. Some truths can only be spoken when everything else has been stripped away. Windswept Gardens Cafe sat perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, its weathered deck and mismatched furniture giving it the casual charm that defined Carmel. But the man sitting at the corner table transformed the cozy space into something predatory, a spider's web disguised as sanctuary. Marcus Blackwood was everything Thad wasn't. Where Thad was tall and solid, Marcus was lean and elegant. Where Thad's presence commanded attention, Marcus drew it like a magnet, all smooth smiles and calculated charm. Even from across the cafe, Marlo could feel the dangerous charisma that had probably opened doors and closed deals throughout his career. Breathe, Thad murmured as they approached the table. His hand found the small of her back, a gesture so natural she almost didn't notice it until warmth spread through her at the contact. Marcus rose as they approached, his smile perfectly calibrated to suggest friendship, while his eyes remained cold as winter ocean. Thaddeus. And you must be the famous Mrs. Chen, Marcus Blackwood. A pleasure. He extended his hand to Marlowe, who ignored it completely. Straight to business. Then, I admire that. Marcus gestured to the empty chairs. Please, sit. I took the liberty of ordering coffee. The Colombian blend is exceptional here. And we're not here for coffee, Thad said, but he pulled out Marlowe's chair before taking his own seat. Of course not. You're here because I hold the deed to Ms. Chen's home, her place of employment, and, if I'm feeling particularly vindictive, her son's future in this charming little town. Marlowe's hands clenched under the table. What do you want? Direct? I like that too. Marcus leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. What I want is quite simple, really. I want Thaddeus to experience what it feels like to lose something precious. Something he didn't even know he valued until it was threatened. This is between us, Marcus, Thad said quietly. Leave them out of it. Oh, but that's where you're wrong. This isn't between us at all. This is about you learning that actions have consequences, that walking away from responsibilities carries a price. Marlowe looked between them, sensing undercurrents she didn't understand. What responsibilities? Marcus's smile widened. He didn't tell you. About Victoria? About how he pursued another man's fiancée and then abandoned her when the novelty wore off? I never pursued Victoria. Thad's voice was steel. She came to me. Because you made yourself available. Because you've spent your entire adult life taking what you want and walking away when it becomes inconvenient. Marcus turned to Marlowe. Did he tell you he came back here 6 months after your little liaison? Looking for you? Marlowe's breath caught. Thad had mentioned this, but hearing it from Marcus felt different. Calculated, weaponized. Did he tell you why he left the first time? Why he makes a habit of running when things get real? Marcus. Thad's warning was low and dangerous. No, please, continue, Marlowe said, her voice deceptively calm. I'd love to hear your version. Marcus leaned forward conspiratorially. Our Thaddeus here has daddy issues, you see. Dear old dad was a serial philanderer who destroyed every good thing in his life because he was terrified of actual intimacy. And like father, like son, the moment Thaddeus feels something real, something that might actually matter, he runs. Each word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to wound both Thad and drive a wedge between him and Marlowe. She could see it working, the way Thad's face went carefully blank, the way his shoulders tensed with old pain. Is that why you left me? Marlowe asked quietly, looking directly at Thad, because it felt real. The question hung in the salt air between them. Marcus watched with obvious satisfaction as Thad struggled to find words that wouldn't confirm everything his enemy had just said. Yes, Thad said finally. I left because I was terrified. Because you made me feel things I'd spent 30 years avoiding. Because I was a coward who thought running was safer than staying and risking becoming my father. The honesty in his voice cut through Marcus's manipulations like a blade. Marlowe felt something shift inside her chest. Not forgiveness, exactly, but understanding. How touching, Marcus drawled. And now you think you can play happy family. Make up for lost time. I think, Thad said, his voice gaining strength, that what happens between Marlowe and me is none of your damn business. Ah, but it is. You see, I own her home, her job, her entire life in this town. Unless what? Marlowe demanded. Marcus pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. Simple. Thaddeus signs over his shares in Donovan Enterprises to Pacific Coast Development, and you get to keep your little life exactly as it is. The silence that followed was deafening. Marlowe stared at the papers, understanding flooding through her like ice water. You want him to give up everything, his entire company. Not everything, just controlling interest. He'll still be quite wealthy, simply no longer in charge of his own destiny. Poetic justice, wait, really? Thad was already reaching for the documents when Marlowe's hand shot out to stop him. No. Both men looked at her in surprise. No, she repeated, stronger this time. You think you can use me and my son as weapons against him? You think I'll let you destroy his life to save mine? She stood up, her chair scraping against the deck. Here's a better idea. Take your papers, your threats, and your pathetic revenge fantasy, and go to hell. Marcus's composure cracked for the first time. Ms. Chen, I don't think you understand the position you're in. I understand perfectly. You're a small, bitter man who can't accept that life doesn't always go your way. Well, guess what? Mine hasn't gone my way either. I've been broke, alone, and scared more times than I can count. But I've never let anyone else pay the price for my choices. She turned to Thad, her heart hammering against her ribs. And you, stop trying to save me. I've been saving myself for 3 years. What I need isn't your sacrifice. It's your partnership. Thad stood slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. Partnership. We fight this together. All of it. Marcus, the eviction, whatever comes next. She reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. Yeah, but we do it as equals. No more running, no more playing martyr. Just us. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, standing on a cliff overlooking the endless Pacific, hands clasped, finally speaking the truth they'd both been too afraid to voice. Some battles were worth fighting, especially when you didn't have to fight them alone. Some victories require losing everything you thought you wanted to find everything you actually need. The phone call came at 3:17 a.m., jarring Marlo from restless sleep. Helen's voice was tight with panic. Marlo, you need to get to the hotel. Now, there's been an incident. 20 minutes later, Marlo stood in the hotel parking lot watching flames lick at the staff quarters building while firefighters worked to contain the blaze. Her apartment, their home, was gone. Everything Oliver owned, every photo from his babyhood, every carefully saved memento of their small but precious life together. Gas leak, the fire chief explained to the small crowd of staff and guests who'd gathered. Old building, aging infrastructure. Lucky it happened at night when the building was mostly empty. But Marlo saw the way his eyes didn't quite meet hers when he said it, saw the suspicious timing, just hours after their confrontation with Marcus. Lucky indeed. Mama! Oliver's sleepy voice came from behind her. Mrs. Henley had brought him when she couldn't reach Marlo by phone, and now he stood in his dinosaur pajamas, clutching his yellow truck, staring at the flames with wide, uncomprehending eyes. It's okay, baby, Marlo whispered, scooping him into her arms. But the words felt hollow. Nothing was okay. They had nowhere to go. No belongings except what they wore. No. Marlo. Thad's voice cut through her spiraling panic. He appeared at her side as if summoned by her desperation, still wearing yesterday's jeans and shirt, his hair disheveled as if he'd run the entire distance from the main hotel. The apartment, she managed to say. It's gone. Everything's gone. I know. I saw the smoke from my window. His hand found her shoulder, steady and warm. Are you hurt? Is Oliver hurt? She shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Tad? Oliver had spotted him and was reaching out with chubby arms. Without hesitation, Thad took him from Marlo, and Oliver immediately snuggled against his shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. Hey, buddy, that's quite a fire, huh? Loud, Oliver observed solemnly. Scary. Yeah, it is scary, but you're safe. Mama's safe. That's all that matters. The simple words, the natural way he comforted their son, broke something open in Marlo's chest. She'd been holding herself together through sheer will, but watching Thad cradle Oliver while their world burned down around them finally undid her. The tears came then, hot and bitter and full of 3 years' worth of suppressed fear. Fear of not being enough, of not having enough, of losing the fragile security she'd built from nothing. Hey! Thad's free arm came around her, pulling her against his side. We'll figure this out, I promise. How? The word came out broken. We have nothing. I have nothing. And Marcus made a mistake. Thad's voice was granite hard. He pushed too far. Before Marlo could ask what he meant, her phone buzzed with a text message, then another, then a flood of them, all from the same unknown number. Nice fire. Accidents happen. Hope you're reconsidering my offer. 7 days is now 3 days. Clock's ticking. Your son looks cold in those pajamas. The last message included a photo, Oliver in Thad's arms, taken just moments ago from somewhere in the darkness beyond the fire trucks. Marlo's blood turned to ice. He's here. He's watching us. Thad looked at the messages, his expression darkening with each word. That's it. Oliver, buddy, we're going to go somewhere safe, okay? Where? Marlo asked desperately. The hotel's full. The staff quarters are gone, and I can't afford anywhere else in town. Even if I could, he'll just... New York. The words hung in the smoke-filled air between them. What? Come back to New York with me. Both of you. My penthouse has security. Resources. He can't touch you there. Marlo stared at him, her mind reeling. You want us to just leave everything I've built here, my job, my classes. Your classes are online now anyway. You told me that yourself. Your job. He gestured toward the hotel, where staff were already being informed that operations would be suspended while the building was evaluated for safety. And what you've built here isn't the place, Marlo. It's this. He touched Oliver's cheek gently. It's him. It's the life you've given him. That travels with you. Oliver had been listening to this exchange with the serious attention he gave to all adult conversations, even when he didn't understand them. Now he looked between his parents with those two knowing gray eyes. Airplane? He asked hopefully. Despite everything, Marlo almost smiled. Oliver had been fascinated by planes ever since he'd seen one flying overhead, always asking when he could ride in one. Big airplane, Thad confirmed. Want to see tall buildings? Really tall ones? Really tall. So tall they touched the clouds. Oliver's eyes widened with wonder, and Marlo felt her last line of defense crumble, not because of Thad's offer, though the thought of safety, of not having to fight every battle alone, was almost overwhelming in its appeal, but because of the way he talked to their son, like Oliver's dreams and questions mattered, like he was already planning a future that included both of them. This is crazy, she whispered. Maybe, but it's also right. Thad's voice was quiet, certain. I know you can take care of yourself and Oliver. You've proven that beyond any doubt, but you don't have to anymore. Let me help. Let me be part of this. Behind them, the fire was finally under control, but smoke still billowed into the pre-dawn sky. Around them, hotel staff clustered in small groups, their futures as uncertain as her own. If we do this, she said slowly, it's not because I need you to save me. It's because I choose to trust you, to trust us. I understand. And if you run again, if you get scared and disappear, I won't. His voice was fierce with conviction. I already lost 3 years with my son. I won't lose another day. And with me. The question slipped out before she could stop it. Vulnerable and terrifying. Thad's eyes found hers in the flickering light of the dying fire. Especially with you. It wasn't a declaration of love. They weren't ready for that yet. But it was a promise. A commitment to stay, to fight, to build something real together. Oliver yawned against Thad's shoulder, apparently satisfied that the adults had worked things out to his satisfaction. When do we leave? Marlo asked. Now. My plane's at Monterey Airport. We can be in the air before sunrise. As they walked toward Thad's rental car, Marlo looked back one last time at the hotel that had been her sanctuary for 3 years. Smoke still rose from the ruins of the staff quarters, but the main building stood untouched, its windows reflecting the first hints of dawn. She wasn't running away this time. She was running toward something, toward the future she'd never dared to dream was possible. 6 months later, some love stories don't end. They just begin again, deeper and truer than before. Marlo stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Thad's Manhattan penthouse, watching Oliver chase pigeons in the private rooftop garden 30 floors below the chaos of the city. At 3 years old, he'd grown into his confidence, his laughter carrying on the spring breeze as he narrated elaborate adventures to his ever-present yellow truck. Mama, look! His voice drifted up through the open French doors. Truck flying! She smiled, her hand instinctively going to the small diamond on her left ring finger, a simple solitaire that Thad had chosen not for its size, but for the way it caught light like hope made tangible. I see, baby. Very high. The engagement had been Oliver's idea, in the innocent way that 3-year-olds solved complex adult problems. Ahead, stay forever, he'd asked one morning over pancakes, and when they'd both said yes, he'd announced matter-of-factly, then Mama needs pretty ring, like in stories, out of the mouths of babes. How's the new project coming? Thad's voice came from behind her, warm with the contentment that had gradually replaced the driven intensity she'd first known. Marlo turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, still wearing his suit from the office but with his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. The small concessions to comfort that marked his slow transformation from corporate machine to family man. Good, really good. She gestured to the laptop open on the dining table, surrounded by financial reports and business plans. The investors are excited about the Carmel Bay restoration. Helen thinks we can have the hotel fully operational again by fall. It had been Thad's idea to buy the hotel from the insurance company after Marcus's arrest. Financial fraud, arson, stalking, The charges had mounted quickly once the FBI started digging into Pacific Coast Development's business practices. Apparently, threatening a real estate mogul's family was the sort of mistake that drew unwanted attention to all sorts of illegal activities. Now Marlo was the managing partner of Carmel Bay Resort and Spa, working remotely while she finished her accounting degree online. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was better, built on choice rather than circumstance, partnership rather than survival. And the staff housing project? Approved. 20 units, all with affordable rent and childcare facilities on site. Her voice carried the satisfaction of a problem elegantly solved. No one should have to choose between keeping their job and keeping their home. Thad crossed the room to stand beside her, his arm settling around her waist with the natural ease of 6 months' practice. Remind me again why you're brilliant. Because I asked the right questions. What do hospitality workers actually need? Security, flexibility, community. She leaned into his warmth. Like amazing what you can accomplish when you listen to people instead of just looking at profit margins. Is that a dig at my business practices? Former business practices. You're getting better. It was true. The driven, isolated man who'd first walked into the Carmel Bay Hotel was still there, but tempered now by daily doses of fatherhood and love. Board meetings scheduled around Oliver's bedtime stories. Business dinners that included high chairs and sippy cups. A life measured not just in quarterly profits but in precious, irreplaceable moments. Daddy, Mama, come see. They found Oliver in the garden, dirt-streaked and glowing with pride, standing beside what appeared to be an elaborate construction site built from flower pots, garden tools, and his collection of toy trucks. What are you building, buddy? Thad asked, crouching down to Oliver's eye level. Hotel, Oliver announced with 3-year-old certainty. On for birds, they need somewhere nice to stay. Marlo's throat tightened with emotion. Somehow, their son had absorbed the essence of their work, creating safe spaces, caring for others, and translated it into his own small world. That's very thoughtful, she managed. I think the birds will love it. Can we build real ones someday? You and me and Daddy? Thad looked up at Marlo over Oliver's head, his eyes bright with possibilities neither of them had dared to imagine 6 months ago. Maybe we can buddy? What do you think, Mama? I think, Marlo said carefully, that anything's possible when you have the right partners. Oliver beamed and returned to his construction project, already planning additions and improvements with the focused intensity he'd inherited from both parents. As the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that reminded Marlo of California evenings, she felt the last of her carefully guarded walls finally crumble, not from force or pressure, but from the simple, radical act of being truly known and choosing to stay anyway. I love you, she said quietly, the words she'd been too afraid to speak finally finding their voice. Thad's arm tightened around her. I love you too, both of you, more than I ever thought I was capable of, even when I'm stubborn, especially when you're stubborn. It's how I know you'll never let me run away again. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their son build castles in the air and dream of hotels for birds, while the city hummed its ancient song of possibility around them. Some love stories, Marlo thought, were worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth building from the ground up, brick by careful brick, until they became something strong enough to shelter not just two hearts, but the infinite love they created together. In the distance, a plane traced silver contrails across the darkening sky, carrying other dreamers toward other possibilities. But here, 30 floors above the city that never slept, home was no longer a place. It was the sound of Oliver's laughter, the warmth of Thad's hand in hers, and the quiet certainty that some echoes never fade. They only grow stronger with time. The end. Adam, thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Love, like the best stories, finds a way to endure, growing stronger through every challenge, every choice, every brave act of trust. What did you learn from Marlo and Thad's story? Have you ever had to choose between safety and the unknown? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below, letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.